There are 3 universal warning signs that something in your life is about to go catastrophically wrong. First, when a landlord smiles too wide while showing you an apartment. Second, when a listing uses the word cozy instead of actual square footage. Third, when you look at a new place and genuinely think, okay, this is where things finally turn around for me. I committed all 3 errors in a single afternoon. There should be a law against this level of concentrated self-deception. There isn't. The universe allows it. Encourages it even. Be me, 26 years old, freelance graphic designer, the kind of person whose personality is approximately 70% monitor glow and 30% the ambient dread that a client is going to email at 1100 p.m. to say they want it more dynamic. I work from home, in the kind of silence that slowly solidifies into a character trait. My social life has the energy of a waiting room, in a building where nothing urgent ever happens. I own 3 presentable shirts and rotate them for video calls. In person, I wear whatever's closest to the door. My old apartment was a studio, the approximate dimensions of a generous coat closet. The neighbor on the other side of the wall played bass guitar on a schedule that suggested he had a personal philosophical disagreement with the concept of sleep. After 2 months of searching through listings that smelled like old carpet and managed disappointment, I was ready to lower my standards to geological levels. The new place was different. Good ceiling height, windows that faced something other than a concrete wall, a kitchen where you could stand without performing accidental intimacy with the counter. The neighborhood was the kind where you can take your phone out of your pocket without first doing a quick threat assessment of everyone within 15 m. The rent was suspiciously reasonable, so reasonable that in a rational universe, it would have been a red flag. I told myself I was simply lucky. I told myself this confidently, which is how you know you're about to be wrong. I moved in on a Saturday, unpacked the boxes, assembled the desk on the second attempt, positioned the monitor by the window, and stood in the kitchen at 1100 p.m. with a mug of tea, feeling something close to human satisfaction. Arrestate. Precious. I made the conscious decision not to rush it. Monday morning. Laptop under the arm. The elevator in this building had the operating philosophy of perhaps now, perhaps not, perhaps never. Who can say? So I was standing on the landing, pressing the call button, and mentally calculating whether I had time to get coffee before the first client call of the day. The elevator doors opened. I looked inside. She looked at me. About 3 seconds passed. Maybe 4. Subjectively, it was an entire geological epoch during which my brain executed the following sequence. Registered a face. Went digging through an archive it hadn't accessed in years. Found the relevant folder. Opened the file. Read the label. And then dropped everything it was holding onto the floor. Claire Ashford. 8 years of school. 3 of them in the same class. The kind of person who could ruin your entire morning with a single look from across the hallway, not because she was cruel in any dramatic, recognizable sense, but because she was precise. She saw exactly the thing you were trying to keep below the surface and named it in the calm, neutral tone of someone making a routine observation, like a smoke detector that goes off not because there's a fire, but because you exist and are flammable. In 9th grade, she called me the archivist for 3 months running because I brought a book to school that nobody in our class had heard of. She announced it to the hallway with the enthusiasm of someone who discovered something genuinely interesting, which somehow made it worse than if she'd been mean about it. In 10th grade, she informed the physics class calmly, descriptively, with no evident malice, that I turned red before I even started speaking, which she characterized as physiologically interesting. The class laughed. I found the answer and said it flat, and sat back down. In 11th grade, she stood next to me during my first real attempt at asking someone out, listened to the whole thing disintegrate in real time, and then said, with the helpful precision of a technical editor. You didn't specify what you were actually proposing. She couldn't tell if it was a date or a group project. I didn't hate her. This is important to establish. Hatred is a warm and active state that requires investment and upkeep. What I felt about Claire Ashford was colder and much quieter than that. Something like a persistent, low-level exhaustion at the thought of being within the perimeter of her attention. The kind of thing you don't feel acutely, but becomes the background radiation of certain memories. 8 years since I'd seen her, I'd managed to file this away. Mostly, she looked exactly the same, which felt like a specific personal act of aggression by the universe. You look exactly the same. She said, that was the opening line. Not wow or hey or any of the normal social protocols that people deploy when they accidentally encounter someone from their past. Just that, direct and immediate. Like the opening move in a game she'd already decided to play. Thanks, I said, running on autopilot. That wasn't a compliment. She stepped out of the elevator. I needed to get in. We were briefly occupying the same doorway at the same time, her exiting, me entering. And she looked at the laptop under my arm with the mild, interested expression of someone who is already in the process of building a case file. You live here? She asked. Since Saturday. 5th floor. Yeah. She nodded. Not surprised. More like thoughtful. The expression of someone for whom this information was slotting neatly into a framework they already had. 4th, she said, and walked toward the building exit. I stood in the elevator and watched the doors close on an empty landing. The good feeling from Sunday evening had evaporated completely. In its place was a faint ringing sound that I associated with the specific frequency of things going unexpectedly sideways. I pressed the lobby button, stood there, thought, okay, fine, we're adults, 8 years, ancient history. The whole thing is irrelevant. We are going to nod at each other near the mailboxes and have absolutely zero further contact. I believed this with complete conviction for approximately 48 hours. Tuesday evening. A knock at my door. I opened it. Claire was standing in the hallway, holding an empty coffee mug with the posture of someone who has arrived to collect something that was always going to be provided. Do you have sugar? Yeah. Give me some. This was not structured as a question. It wasn't even really a request. It was more like a statement about the immediate future and my anticipated role in it. I gave her the sugar. She took it, looked over my shoulder into the apartment with the mild, evaluative interest of a building inspector doing a routine assessment, said, "Not bad," and left. I closed the door, went back to the desk, continued working. Wednesday. She knocked and asked to borrow a knife because hers had gone dull. She returned it 20 minutes later with a nod. Thursday. She came by to check something, which turned out to mean standing in my kitchen for 15 minutes, drinking a glass of my water, and looking out the window at nothing in particular, then leaving without explanation. Friday. She showed up carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place down the street, placed one on my desk without asking whether I wanted it, and established herself on my couch with the confidence of someone who'd been allocated that specific square footage by a higher authority. You work from home, she said. Yeah. Design, branding, packaging, sometimes web. She looked at my monitor. I had a logo in progress on screen. Curves, layered elements, a grid that wasn't quite resolving. Middle left character is sitting too low, she said. I looked at it. She was right. I adjusted it without commenting. You always notice details, she said. You just used to not say anything. Still do, I said. She smiled. Not a knowing smile. Not a smug smile. Just a smile. Like I'd said, something that registered as acceptable. This was unexpected enough that I stored it. Over the following days, I several attempts to maintain what I considered a reasonable level of distance. Didn't open the door a few times when I heard knocking while being fairly certain she was aware I was home. She'd knock once, then again, not with escalating impatience, just methodically with the patience of someone who understood that time was on their side. "I can hear your footsteps," she said through the door one evening. "Hardwood floors, Carrie." I opened the door. "This constitutes a violation of personal space." I said, "This is what neighbors do." She said, "You're catastrophizing." "I'm responding proportionately." "You're responding historically." She said, "Those are different things." I didn't get what she meant until much later, lying in bed that night. I turned it over and it landed. She was talking about school, about the fact that every time I opened the door for her, I was bracing for something that had happened 10 years ago and wasn't happening now. That I was operating on a threat assessment from a previous version of reality. Maybe she was right about that. Maybe not. But I noticed I had started leaving the door unlocked in the evenings. She came by one afternoon while I was in the middle of a particularly frustrating client revision, the kind of email chain where every response is a new instruction that contradicts the previous one, and you can see the document slowly becoming something no one wanted. I was staring at the screen in a state of barely managed professional despair when she walked in, looked at my face, looked at the screen, and said, "Send it back. They don't know what they want yet." I can't just send it back. Right. Based on the latest revisions, I want to confirm the direction before proceeding and attach the version from 3 days ago. They'll figure out they want that one. I looked at her. "That's actually a reasonable approach." "I know," she said, and went to make coffee. I sent the email. The client replied 3 hours later, saying the previous version was closer to what they envisioned. I sat there for a moment, looking at the screen. "You were right." I told her. "I know," she said again, reading something on her phone. This was also going in the file. Some clients insist on meeting in person, not because it's more efficient, just because certain kinds of people need to be in the same room as the work they're buying. It makes it feel real to them. This is fine. I put on actual trousers, took my tablet, and rode the subway into the center of the city. The meeting ran nearly 2 hours. The client wanted a typeface he described as characterful, which translated to, "I want something distinctive but not threatening." He wanted colors that were alive but not loud. He said "we" a lot when referring to decisions that were clearly his alone. I took notes, nodded at the right intervals, and built the actual brief in my head, which was different from the brief he thought he was giving me. When it was done, I ordered a second coffee and decided to stay and work while the client call was still warm in my brain. Pulled up the project files, started blocking out the grid. 20 minutes in, a chair scraped at the table next to mine. I looked up. Claire. She was in a coat, holding a paper cup, standing there with the entirely unsurprised expression of someone for whom this was an expected development. This was strange, because we lived 30 minutes away, in a different part of the city, and this coffee shop was not on the route to anything relevant. "You work around here?" I asked. "Marketing agency. Next street over." She indicated the general direction and sat down. "Did not ask. You just sit at people's tables." I checked if the seat was free. "You pointed at the chair and sat down." "That's not checking. That's announcing." I announced it in a questioning register. I looked at her. She looked at me. "How did the meeting go?" she said. "Client wants alive but not loud. That's navy and gray." Exactly what I said. Or green and cream if he thinks he's someone who takes risks. She made a small sound. Not quite a laugh. Something in the vicinity of one. We sat there for 40 minutes. Awkward for approximately the first 5, and then not, which was its own problem because I didn't have a framework for this. And I could feel myself trying to build one in real time and failing. She talked the same way she always had. Direct. No padding. Asking questions that were actually about what they appeared to be about. I kept expecting something to go sideways. And it didn't. We talked about the project, about her agency, about a typeface she'd seen used badly on a brand campaign the previous week. She had opinions about visual hierarchy that were not wrong. The following Wednesday, I ended up at the same coffee shop around the same time. So did she. And the one after that, no one proposed this. It just became the thing that happened. The way certain things do when no one stops them. Then one Wednesday, my colleague Dan walked in. Dan was the kind of person who processed everything out loud, on his face, in the order it arrived. With no filtering stage, he spotted me from the door, started toward my table, and then his field of vision registered Claire, and his expression went through several stages very quickly. Hey. Oh. Hi. He started, and then sort of stalled. Den. This is Claire. She lives in my building. Old friend. Claire said. Without looking up from her phone, I opened my mouth. I closed it. Dan looked at me with the energy of someone who has just received significantly more data than they asked for and is trying to process it in real time. Cool, he said, with careful neutrality. How long have you guys known each other? School, said Claire. Right, said Dan. That makes sense. He got his coffee and found another table, throwing one look back at me that I interpreted correctly. That evening he texted, Okay. What was that? Who is she? Why did you look like that? I replied. Neighbor. And added a period. He sent back 3 question marks. I left them unread and felt no remorse. The next day, he cornered me on a video call. We were supposed to be reviewing type options for a shared project and spent the first 4 minutes entirely off brief. Okay. So I looked her up. He said, You looked her up? Claire Ashford came up immediately. She's at Fletcher Brand Strategies. Senior account manager. Her LinkedIn is extremely professional and somehow also slightly threatening. Please focus on the typeface options. In a second. I want to understand the dynamic. You said neighbor? She said old friend. Those are different things. They're both technically accurate from different angles. She said it like she was filing paperwork, like she was registering a claim. I looked at the type options on screen and said nothing. I've seen you talk about clients you've known for 6 years and you sound less like that. Dan said, She said, old friend, and you went completely still. I didn't go still. I watched it happen in real time. You did the thing where your face stops doing anything while your brain catches up. Can we please look at the typeface? We're going to look at the typeface in 1 minute. I just want to note for the record that whatever is happening there is clearly something. I'm not saying this to be difficult. I'm saying it because you never tell anyone anything, and I have to collect information through observation, like a naturalist. We looked at the typeface. The conversation ended. I turned off the camera and sat at my desk and thought about the word claim, which I had not used, and he had, and which was sitting there now in the middle of my working day. Not moving. There are things the brain keeps in a folder marked archived, not in use, not because they're destroyed or resolved, but because they've been moved out of active memory into cold storage, and accessing them requires intention. You keep them because brains keep everything. You just stop looking at them. Claire Ashford was one of those files. I genuinely hadn't thought about her in years. There was no occasion to. She existed somewhere in the background of a set of memories I'd categorized under high school. Specific incidents. See also formative damage, cross-reference, learning experiences, clean, organized, not actively causing problems, and now she was causing problems. My brain started doing what brains do when a dormant category gets reactivated, pulling the archive involuntarily, in no particular order, usually at inconvenient times. 9th grade. Hallway. 2nd floor. Walking back from lunch with a book under my arm. Borges. Short stories. Second-hand copy I'd found for almost nothing. I'd been reading it in the cafeteria. Archivist. From somewhere behind me, I turned. She was with a few other people. and she was looking at the book cover with an expression that was genuinely puzzled rather than deliberately unkind. "What are you carrying this time?" "Borges." "Is that a person or a place?" "Writer." "Why does the cover look like that?" The people with her laughed, because that was their function, but she kept looking at the cover like she actually wanted to know. At the time, I logged this as mockery, turned, kept walking. Looking back now, I was no longer certain. 10th grade? Physics class. I was at the board. I knew the answer, and my brain in those situations performed a specific betrayal where it would lower a partition between me and whatever I knew, leaving me standing there going red while the answer waited on the other side. Claire? From the second row, he turns red before he speaks. That's physiologically interesting. The class laughed. I found the answer. I said it. I sat down, and then she said, to me directly, "Not to the room." Correct? Like she was acknowledging something, not mocking the resolution, acknowledging it. I spent years filing that under cruelty. I was beginning to wonder if the filing was wrong. 11th grade. Emma Carter. I'd spent half the school year working up to asking her somewhere, and I finally did it near the schedule board in the main hallway. And it fell apart as I was saying it, the way things do when you've rehearsed them too much. And the real version sounds like an echo of the practice. Claire happened to be in that hallway. She listened to the whole thing. She watched Emma say, "Maybe. Sometime," and leave. Then she looked at me and said, "You didn't specify what you were proposing." She couldn't tell what you meant. At the time, infuriating. Weeks of low-grade fury, followed by settling into a specific kind of deflation. No? I was noticing she hadn't laughed. She'd given me notes, like someone who expected me to try again and wanted me to do better. There was a pattern emerging from the archive that I hadn't noticed from inside the events themselves. She was specific about me in a way she wasn't specific about anyone else. The hallway commentary, the physics class, the Emma situation, it was all directed. She wasn't doing this to the general population. She was doing it to me. I didn't know what to do with this observation. I closed the mental folder, opened Illustrator, went back to the grid. The character was still sitting too low. I moved it up, and the whole thing improved immediately. She'd been right about that, from 10 feet away. Without even being asked, I closed the file and went to make coffee and tried to think about something else, which worked for about 4 minutes. The real conversation happened on a Thursday evening. Not because either of us planned it. The significant conversations rarely get scheduled. They happen in the gaps. When people are tired enough to be honest, Claire knocked around 800, brought food from the place near her office she'd mentioned a couple of times. Takeout containers. Something that smelled like it would solve problems. She put it on the table, with the ease of someone establishing a practice. Rather than making an offer, I set out plates and didn't comment. We ate for a while without talking. Outside the window, it was fully dark. I had something on my monitor that I wasn't working on, just open, giving me somewhere to look that wasn't at her. "You're still carrying the school thing," she said, not framed as a question. "I'm not carrying anything." I said, "I remember it. Those aren't the same. They function the same way. Carrying is active. Remembering is just information. It's filed. And when you open the door and brace for impact, that's just retrieval from the archive. I put my fork down. I don't brace for impact. You do. Not dramatically, but every time there's a beat, a small adjustment, like you're recalibrating to a threat. She was right. I knew she was right. I said nothing. I wasn't trying to hurt you. She said, "I know that doesn't actually change anything, but I want to say it anyway." The physics class was thoughtless. I saw something I found interesting and said it out loud without thinking about what it would feel like to be on the receiving end of it. That's not cruelty, but it's also not nothing. She paused, picked up her water glass. I was 16 and I was good at noticing things. And I genuinely did not understand that noticing things about someone and saying them out loud in front of people was not the same as connecting with someone. I thought attention was the point. It isn't. Attention without any care for how it lands is just another form of exposure. This was more honest than I'd been prepared for. Honest enough that my usual defensive architecture didn't have a response queued. "You're telling me this 8 years later." I said, "There wasn't an occasion before. And now there is." She looked at me. Something in her expression was different. Not the standard issue precision she wore as a default setting. Something less armored. "I know you remember specific things." She said, "I do, too. In 9th grade, Tyler Marsh had a plan to write something about you on the bathroom wall. Something about the book. I told him that if you went ahead with it, I'd make sure everyone knew about the history exam he'd paid someone to sit for him. He didn't do it. You didn't know." I looked at her. "In 11th grade? When you didn't get into your first choice program on the first round?" Jessica Hale was circulating this information with her own editorial additions. "I told her you'd applied through the supplemental process and were already confirmed." She stopped talking about it. "You didn't know that either." I sat with this for a moment. I'm not saying those things cancel out They don't, she said simply. "I'm not offering them as a ledger. I'm telling you because I want you to have the full picture, not just the parts that registered." This was the sentence that recalibrated something, not what she'd done. I hadn't even known about most of it, but the fact that she was offering it without expectation of credit, like she was just correcting incomplete data. "We live in the same building," she said after a moment, "and every time you open your door, you look like you're waiting for the impact. I don't want that to be the version of this that we settle into." I didn't say anything, but something in my chest, some old maintenance protocol that had been running continuously since about 11th grade, dialed back its output without any instruction from me. We finished eating. The silence that followed was a different quality than the silences before it. The first one in this apartment that didn't feel like it was holding its breath. I identified the problem on a Friday, around noon, working on a straightforward rebrand project, typeface variation, the kind of task that runs on muscle memory, and I caught myself glancing at the door, not waiting for anything specific, just glancing at it, the way you glance at your phone when you're not expecting a message, but are vaguely oriented toward the possibility of one. I noted this, noted that I had noted it, went back to work. 20 minutes later, glance at the door again. I ran an internal review. The findings were uncomfortable. Finding 1, Claire Ashford had become the most consistent external variable in my life over the past several weeks. Not because I'd organized this. She just kept appearing, and at some point I had stopped spending energy being annoyed by it, which was itself a threshold I appeared to have crossed without marking it on the calendar. Finding 2, on the 2 or 3 days she hadn't come by that week. The apartment had felt notably quieter. Not pleasantly quiet, just quieter, the way a room feels when something that was in it isn't anymore. Finding 3, I knew that she drank coffee black, that she had a specific irritation with italic fonts used for decorative reasons rather than grammatical ones, that she laughed rarely, and when she did it was almost invisible, which meant that when it happened, you clocked it immediately. This was data I had not asked to collect. My brain had gathered it in the background on autopilot while I was nominally maintaining the position that she was simply a neighbor I was tolerating. The position was untenable. I had been aware of this for some time and had been ignoring the awareness. My friend Marcus called Saturday morning. We talked infrequently, but always got to the point within a few minutes. He lived in another city. Work in something with numbers that he described efficiently when asked, and I immediately forgot, and had a reliable internal lie detector that he deployed without announcing it. "How's the new place?" he asked. "Fine." Your voice is doing a thing. Everything's fine. You said fine twice. That's the tell. I let a pause happen. You remember I mentioned someone from school once. I said, a girl who... The one who you described as systematically something... I don't think I used that word. Very close to it. What about her? She lives one floor below me. A silence on his end. You're serious right now. Completely. And she's been coming by every day. And I've been telling myself this is a normal neighbor situation. And I did a review this morning, and it's not a normal neighbor situation. That's called having feelings for someone. That's called a complicated situation with a history that needs to be. That's called having feelings for someone and being scared of it, which is different from the situation being complicated. I didn't answer immediately. You're quiet. He said, that means I'm right. That means I'm thinking. You've been thinking for 2 weeks at minimum. That's not thinking. That's avoidance, with a thinking costume on. I ended the call, eventually. Sat at my desk, looked at the monitor, looked at the door, did not find a third option. I thought about the architecture of the thing, how I'd moved in expecting quiet and the productive isolation of not having to interact with anyone I didn't choose, and how that strategy had lasted exactly 48 hours before the elevator opened, and a person I hadn't seen in 8 years appeared with a level of composure I still found genuinely irritating. I thought about how she'd started coming by every few days. Then every other day. Then, at some point I hadn't flagged. Essentially every day. How each visit had started with a functional pretext. The sugar, the knife, the coffee, and then the pretexts had quietly become optional, because the visits had just become the thing that happened. How I had watched all of this occurring, and continued to file it under manageable neighbor situation for longer than was honest. The honest version was that I was cataloging things about her without intending to. The honest version was that the apartment felt different on days she wasn't in it. The honest version was that when she said the character was sitting too low, or the left option was better, or that I needed to send the email back, there was something adjacent to relief in it, which is the specific feeling you get when someone whose judgment you've started to trust confirms what you were already thinking. This was information. I worked with information professionally. The correct response to information was to stop pretending it wasn't there. I acknowledged the information, sat with it for a moment, looked at the door. Claire knocked at 630. No stated reason. This had long since stopped requiring one. She came in, poured herself water from the filter on my kitchen counter, which was there partly because she'd contributed to it, looked at my face, and said, "You didn't work today. I worked today. You were in your head today. Different thing. You can tell that from looking at my face for 4 seconds. You have a specific expression when you've been thinking instead of working. The eyes are the same, but the jaw is different." I had no rebuttal for this. She looked at the monitor. Open file, unresolved state, obviously abandoned hours ago. Left option is better. She said, the right one's too condensed at that scale. I looked at the screen. She was right. I acknowledged this internally. Made no external comment. Filed it under an increasingly long list of entries labeled, "She was right about this." It was a Wednesday. And it had been a long one. Client meeting that ran over. Then revisions on top of revisions. Then a video call that could have been an email but wasn't, and by the time I was on the subway heading back, I was operating at approximately 60%. I texted nothing to no one because I had nothing to say, and no one I particularly wanted to say it to. I got home, took my shoes off, put the kettle on, stood in the kitchen in the particular stillness of a day that has been squeezed dry. Then a knock at the door. Claire, black sweater, dark jeans. She came in and looked at me and didn't say anything immediately, which was unusual. She generally opened with something, "Tonight?" She just looked at me for a moment and then went to the kitchen and started making tea, like she knew where everything was, which she did, because she'd been here enough times that the layout was as familiar to her as her own. "Hard day," she said finally, "moderate with complications. Anything worth describing?" "Not really. Just the texture of it." She nodded. Set 2 cups out. We stood in the kitchen while the tea steeped And I thought about what Dan had said weeks ago, that she'd called me an old friend. With the inflection of someone making an announcement, I thought about Marcus saying I was scared. I thought about the Do Not Open folder and how long I'd been maintaining it, and whether any of that maintenance was still actually necessary. Dan asked me about you again. I said, "What did you tell him?" "That we were neighbors." She turned slightly toward me. A small movement. She had a way of redirecting her whole attention without making a production of it. "I told him we were old friends." She said, "That's not accurate. It's a working description." "Of what?" She looked at me directly. Held it. "Of something that doesn't have a clean label yet." She said, "But just neighbors stopped being right some time ago. And I didn't see any reason to keep using it. Simple. No runway. Just a fact, left on the counter, like an object placed where it needed to go. I thought about the archive, about 9th grade and 10th grade and 11th grade, about the specific quality of someone's attention over years, even when it's clumsy, even when it lands wrong, and what that actually means in the end. I thought about the folder I'd kept, marked, archived, not in use, and the fact that I'd been opening it compulsively for 3 weeks. "I need to say something." I said, "Say it." I remember specific things from school, individual incidents. I understand what you told me about them, and I believe what you told me, and that doesn't erase what those incidents felt like when they happened. I want to be clear about that. She nodded. No interruption. Waiting. At the same time, I said, "You are the only person I've met in a long time whose company costs me nothing. And that's genuinely inconvenient. Because by all logic, it should cost a lot." She put her cup down very carefully. "It frightens me." She said, "In case you thought you were the only one." "I didn't know that. Now you do." The kettle had gone quiet. The apartment was very still. There was maybe 1.5 feet between us. And the evening outside the window was doing its ordinary evening things. 8 years. I said, "We were out of each other's lives for 8 years. I know. And now you show up every day and tell me my tracking is off." It was off. That's not the point I'm making. I know what point you're making. She said, and she took one step closer, one measured, deliberate step. Like a sentence spoken with complete conviction. "You can tell me to go," she said. Her voice was very even. "Right now, that would be the rational option." "Yeah. You're not telling me to go." "No." She looked at me the way she always had. Straight, no extra information in it. Only now there was nothing analytical in the look. Something else entirely. Something that had been there for a while. I thought, and had just stopped being concealed. I covered the distance. She didn't move back. She kissed the way she did everything else, without any wasted motion, no preamble, entirely certain of itself. I'd spent weeks watching her be precise about typefaces and client strategy and the exact position of a character in a grid. And this was the same precision applied to something completely different, which should not have been surprising and somehow still was. My brain, which had been narrating constantly for the past several weeks, went silent. I don't know how much time passed. At some point I registered her hands. The fabric of her sweater, the sound of the city outside running its usual program, indifferent to what was happening in a kitchen on the 5th floor. Later, not immediately. But after time had stopped being something I was tracking, she was lying on her back next to me, looking at the ceiling. I was doing the same. The room was dark. The city outside was doing its usual thing. She spoke first. "You said, by all logic, it should cost a lot." "Yeah. That's a strange way to phrase it. It's what I meant. I know. I'm just noting it." Pause. "You talk about feelings like you're reviewing data. You talk about feelings like you're issuing a technical report." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Fair?" The darkness sat between us and around us, and it wasn't uncomfortable. "I don't know how to be soft," she said finally. Not quite to me. More like stating something For the record, I never learned the version where you approach things gently. I went straight to precise, and precise without warmth looks like something it isn't. I know. I'm not apologizing again. I already did. I'm not asking you to. I'm explaining. So you have the mechanism, not just the output. I looked at the ceiling. I thought about this. The mechanism helps. I said. She turned her head slightly toward me. In the dark, I could see the edge of her profile. You're not what I expected either. She said. From back then, you're more settled. I was 16. I was terrified of everything. You were 16. And you were reading Borges. And you turned red before you spoke. But the answer was always right. That was the part that got me. The answer was always right. This landed somewhere it wasn't expected to. You could have just said that. I said. At the time. I know. I said correct instead. And thought that was the same thing. It wasn't. No. She said. It really wasn't. We stayed like that for a while. Not sleeping. Just existing in the same space without needing to do anything with it. This was also a first. It was a good first. She left early. I heard her moving around in the half-dark. Efficiently. Without making a production of it. The apartment was quiet for a few minutes. And then the front door closed with a clean click. On the kitchen counter, she'd left a note. It said, "The tracking on your current project is too tight. Check it when you're awake." I stood there looking at this for a long moment. Went to me desk. Opened the file. Looked at the tracking. She was right. I fixed it before I'd fully had my first cup of coffee. And then I sat there in the morning, quiet, thinking about a person who could look at a logo from across a room and immediately identify what was wrong with it, and who had apparently been paying attention to me in various forms for the better part of a decade, and what that actually meant now that I was done pretending it was a simple situation. The following week had a different quality. She still knocked without a specific reason, still walked into my kitchen with the ease of someone who had long since established residency in my counter space, still talked in the same economical, direct way, no extra words, no decorative framing, just the information. But the maintenance protocol I'd been running since roughly the fall of my junior year had gone fully offline. I noticed this in small ways. I stopped calibrating before I opened the door. I stopped waiting for the impact I'd been braced for. The archive was still there. The files still existed, but they'd stopped being active. This, I decided, was progress. 2 weeks later, Dan saw us coming out of the coffee shop together. He was going in. We nearly walked into each other. He looked at me. Looked at Claire. Looked at me again. His face did its characteristic thing where it processed information without any intermediary stage between reception and expression. "Oh," he said. "Yeah," said Claire. "So, you're—" "Yes," said Claire. Dan looked at me one more time with the expression of a man who was choosing not to say something he very much wanted to say. "Great," he said. "Good. That's— yeah, that makes sense. Actually," he went inside. I looked at Claire. "You answered a question he didn't finish. I knew what he was going to ask. And you were confident in the answer." She looked at me with the directness she'd always had. "No additions. No modifications. You're still asking questions with known answers." She said, "Habit. Bad one. I know. I'm working on it." She considered this, made the small, almost imperceptible sound that served as her laugh. Picked up her coffee. "The tracking?" She said. "You fixed it." "Fixed it? Good." We walked toward the subway entrance. She walked next to me. And she didn't reach for my hand. That wasn't the move yet. And we both understood that. But she was next to me in the way that people stand when they've decided where they are. The city moved around us, doing its usual things. Completely indifferent. As it should be. I thought about how 8 years ago, I would have given a lot to be anywhere in the world that Claire Ashford wasn't. That would have been accurate for the version of me that was 16 and couldn't get to the answer without going red first, and for whom her attention felt like a diagnostic tool, pointed at everything he was trying to hide. I thought about the archive, about the parts I'd cataloged correctly and the parts I'd gotten wrong, about the fact that the archive isn't always reliable because you file things at the time of the event without the later data, and sometimes the categorization needs revision when new information arrives. She'd been revising my categories for 3 weeks now. Methodically, without making a ceremony of it, just placing things where they actually belonged. "You're doing the thing again," she said. "What thing?" The thinking out loud face. "I'm not talking. You don't have to be talking." She glanced at me sideways. "What?" "I'm revising some old files," I said. She was quiet for a second. "Which ones? The ones labeled with your name?" She didn't say anything to that, but I caught the very slight shift in her expression. The one she'd probably been making for years, in rooms where no one was watching for it closely enough. "What are you changing them to?" she asked, finally. "Still figuring it out," I said, "but the current labels were wrong. That part I'm sure about." She nodded once. Slowly, the way she nodded when something was correct, we went down into the subway, and I thought about how I'd moved into a building and found her in the elevator on my second day, and spent 3 weeks running interference on my own understanding of the situation, about how she'd stood in my kitchen and placed facts on the counter without ceremony, and waited for me to process them, about the note on my kitchen counter that said the tracking was too tight, which was also somehow the most characteristically her thing she could have done, because she was precise about everything, always had been, and I had spent years interpreting this as aggression, when it was something else entirely. The train came, we got on, she stood next to me, holding the rail and looking forward, and I thought, this is where things are now. Not where they were at 16, not where they've been in the archive. Here, specifically, which is the only place they actually exist. She glanced at me once. "Stop thinking so loudly," she said. "You keep saying you can't hear thoughts. I can see your face." "What's my face doing?" "Looking like someone who figured something out and is trying to decide if he's allowed to be pleased about it." I looked at her. "Am I allowed?" I said. She held eye contact for exactly 1 beat longer than comfortable. "Seems like it," she said, and that was it. No climax, no orchestral swell, no moment where everything resolves into something cinematic and permanent, just a Tuesday on the subway. 2 people standing close, and one of them being right about the face again, the way she was usually right about most things, which I was finally, after 8 years, after 3 weeks, after a kitchen conversation and a note about tracking, no longer trying to resist. I updated the file, category revised, status current, notes. The answer was always right. Should have said so earlier.